The Newton Historic Commission voted 5-2 to not designate the current senior center building as historic. The vote came about because there is a proposal to tear down the building to build a new senior center known as NEWCAL. Here are the reasons why the commission members voted the way they did.
Thank you, Councilor Malachy and Councilor Lucas for their application and presentation. And thanks to Josh and his team for providing background on the city's policies and procedures. You all know we're charging the landmark ordinance to promote the educational, cultural, economic, and general welfare of the public through preservation and protection of the distinctive architecture and other characteristics of buildings in Newton. That's section 2260 of the landmark ordinance. I don't like seeing this building demolished. I think all of my commissioners share in that feeling. The building is clearly historically significant. We voted so when we found the building to be properly preserved in September 2020 and imposed that 18-month demolition delay, which expires this month. I'm focused on our charge under section 2264 of the landmark ordinance, pointed out by Josh's team. In determining to designate a property as a landmark, this commission must also consider the property's context in relation to the city's policies and adopted plans. I don't believe this gives the city carte blanche to do whatever it wishes. It does require us to balance the historical nature of the property against the city's plans and policies. If the city were planning to tear down the building to pave over a site for a parking lot, it'd be an easy decision to intervene. But here we're presented with building a new senior center to replace the demolished senior center, a building that needs to have universal accessibility. The Americans with Disability Act is not a design law, it's a civil rights law. Those ADA design guidelines are merely minimums required not to violate the civil rights of those with mobility issues. I can't think of a building more important to have full and universal accessibility than the senior center. I don't think the Historical Commission should be usurping the hundreds of meetings and thousands of hours of time that the city has put into planning, designing, and programming the new senior center. There are historical mitigations and plans while creating a universally accessible, barrier-free building. While the existing building has historical merit, I believe the city's plans and policies are much more important for this project. I'm strongly opposed to landmarking the building. And I don't think we need further study of the building. We have volumes of information about its historical significance. From my fellow commissioners, if you would vote no on the eventual designation, there's no reason to vote yes now and further delay the senior center process and create uncertainty that the Historical Commission could bring the process to a grinding halt and kill this location. Thank you.
Anyone else on the commission have a comment or question?
Peter?
Yes, John.
I'd like to follow on Doug's comments, but I support everything he said, and I just like to follow up a number of things. I was on the building committee of the NEWCAL Senior Center right from the beginning of 2018. I was the city council representative, one of the city council representatives for the building committee. So I literally have been to hundreds of meetings, as Commissioner Morris has said, and hundreds and hundreds of hours listening to people about this project. I appreciate Councilor Lucas and Councilor Malachy for bringing this to the Historic Commission, because just to have this discussion and how historic can impact the future of the building. But I also appreciate what the Commissioner Morris has done in the process of explaining the limitations. Basically, I could be speaking because of all the hours I put into this project. I could be speaking forever, but I believe Commissioner Morris has done a very good overview of all the issues and limitations about having it as a senior center. But the most important thing is how it is going to have a significant negative impact on accessibility. And we've had so many meetings with people in the disability community about how this would have a significant negative impact on the use of the building. And the other thing in this is also where the existing building sits on the site. But I would love to have the building at grade level closer to the edge on Walnut Street, which would make it a much better opportunity to integrate the building into a new senior center. but where it sits on the site and how it's accessible doesn't work for the future of the senior center. I think this is a great building, but as Doug Cornelius has said, if we were going to turn it into a parking lot, I would landmark it. I got my library card in this building in 1964. It was my library, and I think it's a great building, but it's not going to work as a future senior center. And there are hundreds and hundreds, and there are thousands of people in the city who are going to benefit for having a much better senior center by having a new building. I also like to talk about, there's been a lot of feedback about, well, if we get rid of the gym, we can make it a much smaller building. We can push it back and we can use the existing site. For the last 17 years, I've been running the High Community Center, which has a gym in Newton Highlands. For the last 4 years, we have been donating our gym to use by the senior services to do Tai Chi, to do Zumba, to do yoga, to do many athletic programming for the senior services. And people have been in that gym, and they realize they need a bigger space. They need open space to do this kind of programming. And we have a 5,000 square foot gym, which kind of matches up with the gym that would be in this new senior center. There's also a discussion about we're destroying a park in front of the building. I was as a city council for 10 years, I was chairman of programs and services for 6 of those years. And I had a lot of interaction with the Parks and Rec commissioners and Parks and Rec department about with the different parkland in the city. And the Parks and Rec department, if you go to the website, it doesn't view this with the front of the senior center as parkland. I'm currently, after I left city council after 10 years, I am now a Parks and Rec commissioner as well as being a historic commissioner. And and the Parks and Rec commission, there's a number of things that to be considered parkland. And it does not, so the front of the senior center does not have a Parks and Rec, does not have a parks a restriction. And it's not part of the Parks and Recreation open space and recreation plan. And so in other words, yes, I was at the meetings where people were giving their feedback about Albemarle. And that's when the Parks and Rec Commission decided that Albemarle was not the solution for the new senior center. But the space in front of the new senior center, the space in front of the senior center as it exists now is not parkland would be losing because there's going to be significant amount
recording
of space.
Stopped.
There's a significant amount of space that will be used for the community.
Recording in progress.
For people to get together in passive and active recreation in front and by the sides of the senior center. So Doug Cornelius from the Historic Commission, I will not be voting for landmarking. I will not be voting for nomination of landmarking. And I believe that the delay of 6 months where this project has been starting in 2018, and it would be a significant impact on the seniors in the city and how it impacts the residents and the seniors as well. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else on the commission have a comment or a question? Harvey? You're muted.
I'd like to say that I wholeheartedly support the remarks that both of the other commissioners have made. I think Doug gave a great synopsis. I will admit I was a little skeptical of landmarking at the outset, and actually found the work done by Epsilon to be extremely persuasive. One of the, it seems to me that it actually does the sort of things that a landmark study would do. And one of the aspects that I thought, which I thought was extremely interesting, but wasn't included in tonight's presentation, was the summary included in the materials furnished to the commission members of classical and colonial revival buildings that had been landmarked. Much as we might like the library, I think when you look at the other examples of landmark buildings, it's pretty clear on its face that the library does not rise to the same level of these other landmarked facilities. So I too will join the two preceding speakers in declining to proceed with a landmark study.
Thank you. Amanda, you had your hand up.
I did. I have a lot of thoughts, but the preliminary or overarching one is that this is becoming politicized in an interesting way that preservation is not inherently supposed to be. And I think as a commission, our job is we're not supposed to be thinking about function or use, right? Everyone's making the comparison to, well, if this were a parking lot, we're going to be a parking lot, I would landmark it. We are looking at the architectural and historical significance. And if we feel that were that to be a parking lot, we would want to save this building, we should be wanting to save this building regardless. It is about, you know, whether we are retaining that history or whether we are moving past it and demolishing it. And I think I'm just sorry to stay with the main point, because I have a lot of other little ones if we were going into the nitty gritty of the landmarking or of the history that was presented by Councilors Lucas and Maliki, which I thought was super comprehensive and wonderful and interesting. However, I feel like what we are tasked with is to assess the historical value and to say, well, we don't want to see this building adaptively reused because it's too inconvenient or because we've had these meetings. That's just a different issue. And I think we need to keep it very black or white. Do we want to learn more information about this? Are we trying to protect our landmarks? Are we interested in protecting our possible landmarks and knowing as much as we can know? Or are we saying that we always, you know, kowtow to whatever the political agenda is of the city? Sorry. I know that is a controversial statement, but I feel like that's the position we're being put in.
Thank you, Amanda. Anyone else on the commission? Comment? Well, you know, I've been looking at this for a long time, and I think that the argument has shifted from saving the building to building a great facility that seniors deserve. And I think everyone here believes that the seniors should have a great new building. The question is why is the city picking on the historic old library senior center as a site? I can't believe that there's not a better site in the city that has parking. This site has no parking. Seniors are going to have to walk a far distance in ice and snow and cold to get to the building. It's a bad location, but it's set up that the argument has been set up to say either you support a senior center or you support historic preservation. They're two totally separate things. And you can do an analysis of the building and say, well, you know, the heights are wrong. And you know, I think everybody would agree. The heights are wrong for a senior center, but it doesn't mean the senior center has to be at that location. And I think it really does a disservice to cram a building like that into a tiny space and say, well, this is a great facility for seniors. It's clearly not. It wasn't even in the top, I think, top 6 locations selected by the committee who's working on this to say, what's the best location for this in the city? It wasn't in the top 6, and they're settling for an insufficient space because they think that there are no other spaces. So I'm disappointed by Epsilon's review because they left out a lot of the historical details that were so interesting, presented by the city councilors and in the materials submitted to us, that I think more a conclusive study needs to be completed. It's the responsibility of the historical commission to take a good solid look at these things and not make a political decision. I think it's grossly unfair that Josh, as tenacious as he is, and I applaud him for that, you know, made it saying, well, if you do another study, it's going to cost us $500,000. It's like, you know, it's totally an unfair way to present to the historical commission. We're all volunteers, we're all taxpayers in Newton, and to say, you know, you have to decide now, otherwise it's going to cost us, is totally inappropriate. And I think, you know, to move ahead, and I'd like to I talked to John Rice, a couple months ago, and he said he thought it was the wrong location, unless I'm putting words in his mouth. And as far as the park goes, at the front of the building, it is a park. It was described as the Alderman as a park when they funded it. It may not be on the city's list of parks, but if it acts like a park and it looks like a park and it's called a park, you got to call it a park. And there are restrictions about using parks for getting rid of parks, under state law. So, I think we really need to study this more, and I'm gonna recommend and look for a motion to accept the nomination and to ask for further study.
Peter, if I could just respond to Amanda's statement saying, that politics got involved. Again, we're tasked with preservation, but we're tasked with administering the ordinance as it's written. And the ordinance as it's written says we do have to take into account the city's policies and plans.
I mean,
that doesn't mean that everything gets torn down. Amanda?
Sorry, I was going to say, that is not how I would interpret it. And I don't think that it's sort of a boilerplatey kind of ordinance that other cities have. And certainly that is not the interpretation across the country.
Peter, can I also clarify your comment that you made that I said it was the wrong location?
Yes.
But the discussion was it the best location? It wasn't. We weren't talking about the discussion. Was it the wrong location? Because there's only so much open space in the city, and we're not allowed to parkland, and we did have to cut down the amount of space for the building to fit into the site of the Newtonville Library. There were some better spots that weren't being able to be used because of recreation land. So it is the best land, the best opportunity to actually have a senior center that seniors can actually use.
Is it not a park that would also have to be replaced?
No, but it would not have to be. It wouldn't be part of that recreation reuse process.
Okay, Harvey.
I'd like to take a different tack. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that the building is studied and landmarked, and the senior center finds a new home someplace else. It seems to me that the accessibility issues in this building are so monumental that it will never find a use. And what we will end up with is a landmark building that's an empty shell and basically of no particular good to anyone other than as a memento of the 1930s.
I've thought of that, and I think the building might be used for maybe something like affordable housing, if it's landmarked and could be reused that way. Or maybe the building could be exchanged with one of the new building space on Washington Street, that maybe the city can do some sort of exchange for the value of the senior center as housing versus, and have a new location on Washington Street with enough parking to serve everyone. So I think there is some application for that building.
Well, any of these scenarios would require substantial modification of the building. It doesn't lend itself to obvious reuse for any of the sorts of scenarios that you're suggesting. I mean, I can't think of a practical use for this building that would end up being that would allow us to have our cake and eat it too, to preserve the building and have a use in it that makes that preservation a virtue. Okay.
Anyone else on the commission have a comment or a question?
Yeah, I'll chime in. Peter,
sure, Mark. Yeah, please.
I think Harvey is really encapsulated, and Doug as well. I think if this building rose to the level of detail and study of the neoclassical style, if it was a really good example of that, yeah, let's preserve it. But it's actually a pretty pedestrian example of this style. the mitigation efforts by the building department to preserve the details, the light fixtures and things like that are really commendable. I think those are the really best parts of the building, the stained glass and things like that. But I think that if I can share my screen, let me see if I can. You know, we're not talking about a building like this, which I'm familiar with, which is a library in New England. And what they've done is they've can you see this, everyone?
What are you pointing to, Mark?
Preserved the room. They preserved the facade of the building. But what I want to call your attention to is the detail of the building, that this is a beautiful building that they preserved and that they've gone to the effort to preserve, and that we don't have in this situation. We don't have that kind of building at our disposal that we really revere, we really respect. It's a great place and it's been useful over the many years, but it's a one-off building. It's for a single purpose and it's really difficult to adapt. Now the picture I showed you was a library being adapted and expanded as a library. So it made sense to do that. And it was a beautiful facade. But in our case, I don't think we have that. And I don't think it rises to the level of nomination.
Okay, anyone else have a comment? Would anybody care to make a motion to accept the nomination of 345 Walnut Street?
I'll make the nomination.
Okay, anybody second? I will second the motion. Under section 2263 of the city's landmark ordinance, to authorize the city's preservation planner to conduct a study of its historical significance. Mark, how do you vote?
I'll vote no.
Doug?
No.
Harvey?
No.
Nancy? You're
No.
muted. Doug?
No.
Okay, and I am a yes. And Amanda?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, the motion is defeated. It is not landmarked. Thank you all for your time and your participation. We appreciate it very much.